All right, welcome back to your last set of lectures for the topic of scarcity. In this topic, you would note that we've covered the basic elements of scarcity because of scarcity of the economic problem, and we looked at what do we mean when we talk about economic problem. We looked at making decisions at the margins. Now we will go on to the slide where commenters by asking the three sort of fundamental questions. Basically, in order to satisfy consumer demands in the sort of era or amid scarcity, producers must ask themselves three fundamental questions. So, producers are people producing goods and services. In terms of responding to the scarcity of resources, they ask themselves three questions. One, what should be produced? Two, how should goods and services be produced? And three, for whom should goods and services be produced? What should be produced? Using the sort of economics of scarce resources to produce one thing requires giving up another. Producing better education, for example, may require cutting back on citizens' health and education. Better education, health, and infrastructure. A decision to preserve a wilderness area requires giving up better use of the land. Every society must decide what it will produce and with its scarce resources. So the question is determined by choices from consumers, firms, and the government. So how should goods and services be produced? What should be produced? There are sorts of choices like determining how goods and services should be produced. Should you firm employ a few skilled or a lot of unskilled workers? Should it produce its own country or should it use foreign plants? Or should manufacturing firms use new or recycled materials to make their products? So these are some of the factors of production, some of the decisions involved in what is to be produced. Now, if you look at how should goods and services be provided for firms, choices, they have a trade-off. So more machines or fewer workers, more workers, fewer machines, or locally, offshore, or locally, yeah. So they sort of make decisions based on what is the best sort of trade-off that they can achieve. Either more machines, that means fewer workers, that means less in terms of salary and wages, or more workers and fewer machines, so that if a machine is very expensive and cannot be ordered or cannot its upkeep is very expensive, then workers are more preferred. And a lot of these companies they decided to move sort of manufacturing offshore. So most of these clothes and most of these brands that you see, they are made in countries such as Bangladesh and countries with very minimal wages requirements, so that the big corporations sort of turn a profit and they move production offshore. All right, for whom should goods and services be produced? If goods and services produced, a decision must be made who will get it. So basically, what a decision is sort of has to be made like who are we producing the goods and services? For example, percentage of the poorest nation on earth often complain that energy consumption per person in the United States is 17 times greater than energy consumption per person in the world, 62 poorest countries. Critics argue that the world's energy should be more evenly allocated. Should it? That is a for whom question now. So who am I producing goods and services? So the poorest country, they said to combine 62 of them, and the United States is 17 times greater than energy consumption per person in the world's 52 poorest countries. So that's a contrasting sort of comparison, and it's very, very alarming to see that. So, in essence, in deciding what should be produced, it requires, if you focus on one sector, it will sort of cut back on the other sectors. If you, how should you produce goods and services? Determination of factors of production, firms sort of trade-offs, and doing things at the margin. And what you do is you make all these decisions so that you can sort of try and produce goods and services at the margins. All right, for whom to produce, basically, it goes on to show that when you produce something, who are the likely consumers or benefits? Who should benefit from the goods? So if you see the slides there, depending on how income is distributed, higher the income, the more ability to buy goods and services. So if you have an high income, you can buy more goods and services. Then you ask a question, what about people on low income? What about people with basic needs? So when you have high income, it raises policy questions of whether government should intervene, example, progressive income tax. That means that if you have a high income, you should pay a lot of taxes. So all these questions come about because of the fact that goods are scarce and producers must always deal with how things are produced and also for whom these goods and services to be produced. for and what should be produced. Those are the basic things that producers face every day in the production model or production line. All right, the concept of the scarcity model, you see unlimited ones, limited resources, scarcity. As a result, there's going to be choices. Choices are what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So you know all these concepts. Basically, in a microeconomics or in an economic setting, producers are the one that produce goods and services. So if they have to decide what to produce, they have to sort of look at sort of the different sort of criteria or background or different sort of circumstances that will affect production. For instance, if they push to produce for better education and the government decides to invest more money in better education, it has to cut back on health services because resources are limited. The government cannot focus more on or focus to satisfy both sort of service delivery mechanisms. So, like I said, if the government is focusing more on Connect PNG, it will cut back on education and health in Papua New Guinea. All right, factors of production. This is basically looking at land, labor, and capital and how this should be sort of used. So, should you employ, full-time employees with high salary and benefits, or or few casual workers? Should you employ a few skilled and a lot of unskilled, or should you employ a lot of unskilled supervised by a few skilled? All right. So in terms of manufacturing, do you use recycled materials to cut costs, or do you sort of use new materials? These are some of the decisions that firms will have to do trade-offs. So the trade-offs is, more machines, fewer workers, or fewer machines, more workers, or whether you push production locally, and if it's expensive, you push it offshore. So a lot of this Nike, like a lot of these brand clothing, Nike and Puma, and even in Australia, all the clothes that it's being sold in Australia, you don't see them manufactured in Australia. You will find at the back of the sort of clothes you will see made in China, made in Bangladesh, all these other places. Because when making trade-offs, firms must decide at the margins, and they said it's better to the wage for a worker to produce one shirt in Bangladesh is cheaper than the wage of an Australian worker to produce the same amount of shirt. As a result, all these big textile and clothing factories of multinational companies are all being pushed overseas for production to happen there. And then they are sent back to be sold in the country of where the company is. All right, for whom to produce, you know that basically it depends on who has the higher income. If you have more money, you can demand more goods and services. So where do you find the balance? What about people with low income? What about basic needs? So it's raised some questions of whether government should intervene. Example, in terms of taxes, should people earning more pay more taxes as well? All right, and then the last slide, it summarizes the scarcity model. Unlimited ones, limited resources, scarcity, choices, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. All right, this is the basic lecture on scarcity. Now we'll move on to the lectures on price elasticity. Thank you.